Welcome back again to the Abi for MP podcast.
How many have we done now?
I don't know, 1,000.
Millions.
Millions, yeah. Well, that's the aim. The aim is
I
to
did
do
say
that
to you, didn't I, could this be our full-time job instead? And you told me no.
You love to bring that up, don't you? All right, it'll be a full-time job. We just need to keep on going.
We said, didn't we, if we get lots of people listening,
Yeah.
maybe we could do it.
Abby is
Forget
very
running.
keen. Yeah, Abby thinks this is her new vocation now. Just being interviewed. Well, that probably will be your vocation, a lot of it as well, if you get the get the MP. So maybe that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good practice.
Love it. Love it. So this week I thought it would be interesting to talk about because something maybe a little bit more like what people are asking on the doors. Mm-hmm. Maybe some classic kind of subject matters that people are asking. And one of those things is people always asking about the environment. Rightly so.
Yeah, they do ask about the environment.
I would consider the environment very important.
Is it important to you?
The environment is very important to me, actually, yeah. Yes. I don't think we can do much, and obviously we're in a bit of a crisis at the moment, I think, legitimately. We've not got a huge amount of time before there's irreversible damage. And obviously living around in the West Country, as a lot of the other places in the UK, but it's stunning.
Yeah.
And it's the fields are green, and I think there's an idea that things will just always kind of be this way. But I think it's actually it's not secure.
Yeah. The environment is also very important to me. It's always been really important to me. I remember when I was young and I used to, when you get plastic bags, I'm talking like 10, 11, 12, I used to have plastic bags and I never used to want to throw them away. I was always very like, this is like 30 years ago. And I was always very like, what happens to this plastic bag, which is before it even became like, and like, I made my mum buy free-range chickens, for example, to eat. I don't know where. It must have been influenced somewhere, maybe at school or... Yeah. But it was always really important to me. And then 5 years ago, 2018, so 6 years ago, we actually decided to stop flying as a family. So it is a big deal. It still is a big deal. Like Peter, my husband, is Irish and we have family in Ireland. And every time we go, we get a boat. So it's more expensive.
Yeah.
And takes longer.
Well, this is, I suppose, maybe we can go use this as a bit of a segue, because it's almost a bit of accessibility around. Obviously, we all want to do things that kind of lessen the impact that we have on the environment. And I think personally, one of those things is holding big companies accountable for what they're doing, but also to travel in a more green way isn't necessarily accessible.
No, it isn't. It's expensive, and we don't have, so locally no buses, regular buses, and it's expensive. And then nationally and internationally, again, it's more expensive to travel when you're not flying, and takes longer.
Yeah.
So it is a big commitment, and we do need to make. In Europe, they've got a fantastic rail system, for example. You can go all over Europe on a train that's reliable and fast and affordable. And we don't have that here.
And
we don't have that here.
Why don't we have that here?
Well, there's lots of reasons why. Probably we haven't invested in it. We've privatised it. It's another area that we've privatised, for example. So all the profits go back to a shareholder rather than back into the service itself to make it better and affordable and good, a good service that we're offering. So I think all of those things feed into why we don't have good service provision in that area here.
Yeah, because I think for everyone listening, I grew up in a very rural area, and at that point my parents didn't have a car. We had a bus that might come 2 times a day, and you kind of had to be there within like half hour either side.
Wow.
Because of the unpredictability of it. So I ended up spending a lot of time just walking.
Waiting for buses.
Yeah, exactly. And I love having a car.
Yeah.
Because it gives me that independence, that kind of freedom that I kind of didn't have. Yeah. And the bus routes, especially in rural areas, they're not. I wouldn't really consider them there as much as they could be. So, is that something that you've heard on the doors that other people have concerns about?
Oh, it's a big deal. Yeah. So I'm part of a Save the Bus network as well, and I have met with various people in that organisation who are trying to save the bus routes and make them, something that we can use regularly. Just an effective service in this area. It is a big deal in this area, in a rural area.
Because it's accessibility, and then if we could also do that, we'd minimise the amount that we'd have to then use our cars. So if services were there, I think people would use them.
Yeah, like if you've got a hospital appointment in Bristol, and so it's a nightmare to drive to Bristol, park in Bristol, get, all of those things. But if there was a bus that went to Bristol, like Southmead or Bath Hospital, people would do it. I think people would do it.
And obviously, there's the fact that there is, electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So all that could be done in a much cleaner way, reduce emissions.
Let's talk about electric vehicles and some of these green boxes that we try and tick in government.
Let's do that.
So I think there's and when we built the houses as well, these houses are passive standard, which means that they are completely airtight and they are very eco. So they conserve energy. They're very warm. They're cool in the summer and they're warm in the winter. They don't use very much energy to heat them. So they're good from that point of view. But when we were building them, which was 10 years ago now, there was a lot of green bling, as you call it, that we could add to the properties that would just tick that sort of box, but it would be very expensive. So ground source heat pump, for example, air source heat. So, and actually they're very difficult to maintain as well because there aren't because there aren't very many people who are trained to, if something went wrong with it, who would you get to come and fix it?
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a gas boiler, all the plumbers are trained to deal with your gas boiler. So I think we go to this place in Parliament where it's like, okay, that's green initiative. It's a tick box. We'll tick, 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 and we've done our obligation to the green, to the environment, and that's great. But I don't think we think long or hard enough about that. What we're actually trying to do. Okay, do we actually care about the environment, and what are the long-term implications? I do have some concerns around electric vehicles for two reasons. The first is that we don't actually produce enough electricity to power them all if everybody was to have one. And the second one is they have a battery. And batteries have components in them that are difficult to recycle.
Yeah.
So and they only have a certain lifespan, a battery.
I think also the difficulty of some vehicles, it's electric under 30, like a hybrid would be under 30 miles per hour.
Yeah.
It's using electric. Above that is petrol.
Yeah.
And living in a rural area, if you have to drive a lot, how often are you actually using that kind of regenerative power? Yeah.
So I think we've gone to this electric vehicles that ticks that box.
Sounds good as well, doesn't it?
Sounds great, all of it. But but there are negatives to that. And have we talked about those enough? And again, back to that sustainability. Is it a sustainable option?
Again, I suppose it kind of comes back to the idea that you've talked about before with short-term solutions versus like long-term planning, because it might be seen as a bit of a sticking plaster that even just sounds better than it is actually effective.
And we're just seen to be doing something that's good for the environment. So it's that imagery, isn't it?
Got a little bit of lip service going on.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions, always.
What's another one of your questions?
Well, I think that there's questions with everything. It's like, and mostly it is what we're planning to implement. Is it got long-term? Are there long-term gains? What is it where's our blind side? What are we not thinking about with implementing this? Really, they're simple questions, and you can apply them across the board, but definitely with the environment. And we need to put back into our soil, for example. So we're stripping with fertilizers and chemicals. We're stripping our soil of all its nutrients, and we need to teach. It's education again, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's teaching people to put back into their soil so that we got longevity with our.
Yeah, well, I read the other day that due to like intensive farming as well, having to ship soil in because the quality of the soil is so poor, and obviously if the quality of the soil is poor, then the plants that we might eat
You just keep stripping. You don't put it back in.
Yeah. There's a distinct lack of repairing going on there.
Yeah.
And so is there another kind of tick box? Do you have any more on the green tick boxes that you see Parliament using?
What do you think? I mean, air travel is a big one. It's one of the biggest carbon
emission
takes, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We still expanding our airports, encouraging people to fly. Flights are still really cheap.
I think the price is undeniable. The fact that you might be able to get a £30 flight to Ireland versus or maybe
we just bought a ferry to Ireland, £300 return for two of us.
Again, a £30 flight up to Glasgow from the south of England.
There you
go. Train might be £200.
Yeah.
So the incentive isn't there.
No, they're not there. No, exactly. So that for me, that's. So we're either in denial or we're saying it's not a problem, and which actually I feel like the government we have at the moment are saying that they are like, well, we don't want to inhibit people's lives. I've heard Rishi say things like that. We don't want to inhibit people's life choices.
Yeah, I suppose relatively famously, he also talked about when there's the idea of a meat tax, and he said, well, I'm not telling anyone to stop eating meat. But your party's also putting that in, or there's conversations around it, and I suppose it kind of brings to the idea of regenerative farming as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of something I'd like to ask you about as well, because farmers are also incentivized, or the profit margins tend to be quite small, so it's a supply and demand industry. So what might be a way that we can incentivize farmers to take some of their land and potentially rewild it, things like this, because that might be a better idea of we have the money paying farmers to take their land and make that more eco again as well.
Yeah, I think that would be sensible, wouldn't it? We have a lot of agricultural land, but we still import an awful lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But we could be more sustainable, self-sustaining, and we were during the war, weren't we? We grew our own. People had their own small holdings. People grew their own vegetable, like the Dig for Victory sort of messaging that went out there. So we could be a lot more self-sustainable. I mean, look at Holland, for example. They're a small country, but they produce so much of their really good quality fruit and vegetables.
And I suppose
they have a similar climate to us,
I suppose the incentive for people to be able to, personally, I don't think, you can't be self-sustainable really on like a small patch of land. You can kind of do your best, but there's always things you're going to need to take in. And so I think the local idea is really good here, but I suppose it also comes down to convenience.
Yes, convenience, yeah.
Because, tell me if you disagree, but again, with the idea of a flight, it's more convenient, and especially if it's cheaper, but let's say it's the same price, you could get there in half the time by some flight. And so maybe something like wanting to be more sustainable and do things locally, and like you're saying, during war times where we were slightly more self-sufficient, that comes with having the time dedicated to it.
We just took care over our land, didn't we? And we were much more thoughtful about, people were hungry during the war, weren't they? So it became much more imperative to do that. But I think like you said at the beginning of this session, was maybe we're reaching that point now where it is imperative that we start looking at our environment and the way we do things.
And it seems to me, again, that everything we talk about tends to come down to this like collaborative approach. But who do you think has the answers, or what are the answers to these issues of not being as green as we could be?
I think we need to be honest about the situation that is there, and there are a lot of different theories about climate. For example, I don't actually use the term climate change because it can be quite offensive to some people. Like they are like, no, there's no such thing as climate change. So there are people who are saying that what we are doing doesn't actually have any impact on our climate, and it's just some people sensationalizing that as an issue. But I think there's always, even with those people, and I've had these conversations on the door, where we're not talking about climate change particularly or X, Y, and Z. We are just talking about looking after our environment and doing the best that we can to look after our environment that we live in. And we have gone through a period, many years, 30 years probably plus, of having a convenient lifestyle where we have eaten a lot of processed foods. And, you know, when technology was developed and the ability to do these things came in, we were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Let's go and do that. But there have been negative impacts to our environment as a consequence. And convenience is like you say, like getting the flight and processed foods in the supermarket or whatever. But maybe it's just about taking these things back. Maybe technology advanced too quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe we just need to take things back a little bit and slow down. I think slowing down sometimes is a good thing.
I think you've hit on a really good point there. And I think the slowing down of taking more time, I know that there might be, we might need to be hitting like net zero goals.
Yeah,
quick.
That's a good example, yeah.
But I think slow and steady wins the race. And again, it's a sustainable, what effort can we implement that is sustainable versus going, we need to fix this now.
Yeah.
And then that not working.
Be
and
too
then
reactionary, yeah.
Exactly. So I think you've hit on a really good point with that time.
Yes.
And I think as we've seen during the pandemic as well, the environment really comes back if you let it.
Yeah, oh yeah, nature reclaims all the time.
It bounces
Look
back.
at quarries that are disused now and that nature takes back. And you know, sometimes you drive through an area and there's like a house that's fallen into disrepair and there's like trees growing out of it. And nature's got a great way of reclaiming. So it wants to reclaim nature. That's the planet that is regenerative.
It puts itself back into its own balance.
Very
which
clever
is
like that.
Very clever. If we kind of just let it do its thing.
Yeah, if we let it do its thing. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it.
And I suppose it would be silly not to talk about, as we are in Somerset and the rest of the country as well, but some of the really serious flooding that's happened.
Yes, big issue around here.
And so what have people kind of been experiencing?
Like flash floods. The water level is really high in this area, so we've had 2 major flooding incidents in the last 6 weeks in this area. It's very impactful on people because it's coming into their homes. You know, some people it's coming up to like here in their homes.
Yeah, about 3 foot off the ground, right?
It's really distressing. Really distressing. So we need to look at, and maybe it always did flood. Who knows? But maybe it is things that we are doing to our environment that is exacerbating that issue and making it worse. Yeah,
I think again, you must have a lot of nails to hit this many nails on the head. But I think it's what are we doing to exacerbate these things? Because there's something we're doing that's speeding it up.
Yeah, maybe there is, and maybe we need to look at that and ask some questions around it. So again, it's when we're developing housing and roads, and particularly in this area in Somerset, which is on the levels. So we have a floodplain. You know, that is the area that we live in. When we're developing big housing estates, that needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that is what our environment is, particularly in this area. So we need to factor that in. How is that going to impact on flooding in the future?
That's a really good point, actually. And I think it's a really interesting point that quite often we talk about how do we stop something from happening?
Yeah.
Whereas I think from what you're saying here, there seems like more of a conversation around how do we manage this situation?
Yeah, how do we manage it?
And try and improve it?
Yeah, how do we manage it? And are there things that we can be doing alongside our developments that support that situation rather than make it worse?
Yeah.
And let's not just close our eyes to it.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest about it. This is what's happening. This is the area we live in. This is what we have to deal with.
And I suppose, again, there's some responsibility that I think just maybe as a collective human species have to take some responsibility that things are happening, like you say, not trying to bury one's head in the sand, or not get distracted by the things. And I think that can become quite overwhelming when there's so much going on.
Yes, but if we have these conversations at this point, it's better than if we have them later when we're reacting. So it's always better to be proactive than reactive, always.
I love that. Well, on that note, Thank you everyone for listening to another episode. Again, if you have any questions or anything that you'd love us to talk about or address on the podcast, get in touch through the website, and we'll see you next time.